high-ranking environmentalists in Canada, such as Justin Trudeau and Steven Guibeault, I think should be a lot more like RFK Jr. in the United States with respect to the environment. RFK Jr., for one, is not so laser-focused on carbon like we are in Canada, and RFK Jr., which I'll show in a second, has more of a holistic view of the world, and Canada just have to stop its hyperfixation on climate change and carbon pricing, which I'll show later in the video. And I'm sure most Canadians watching this know Canada has much bigger problems right now.
What is a pollution cap? Well, it's a new mechanism that we're adding to our arsenal of measures to fight climate change in Canada. And basically what we're doing with that is putting a cap, literally, on the amount of pollution that the oil and gas sector can emit.
So this is a very recent clip too. Like, this is how Canada still is reacting and acting about the climate issue. That was on November 5th, that clip. I believe it was just from around there, that video. We still have not pivoted, despite the fact that Canada has a whole bunch of economic problems that just aren't related to climate change. And look, as RFK points out in this video, everybody cares about the environment, having clean air, clean water, and just a connection to nature. But Canada's so fixated on, I think, the wrong things. Like, we just need to get our priorities straight. Here's kind of a funny, but it's actually true. Like, it's crazy. Report: an edible cricket factory in London, Ontario has laid off 2/3 of its employees just 1 year after receiving 8.5 mil in funding from taxpayers via the Trudeau Liberals, who viewed it as an environmentally friendly alternative to meat. Like, people aren't going to eat crickets yet. Things would have to get so much worse for something like that to actually work. Like, I really pray and hope that people that in, like, especially in Canada and around the world, aren't eating crickets. Like, it just sounds so dystopian.
We're dropping inflation and we're being there for Canadians, not with cuts and austerity, and we're going to keep doing that. And on the carbon price, it actually puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadian families. That's a parliamentary budget officer who says that. It's absolutely true. Ha ha. We're dropping inflation.
Ha ha. Ha ha. So yeah, that clip went viral at the time. Kind of a funny way to end it off. But again, one more and then I'll go to RFK, but just showing how Canada's priorities are so focused on carbon.
Those premiers who talk about the need to pause never talk about the fact that as carbon pricing goes up, for families, the rebates also go up. That's a fact. Yes, but the cost of climate change are also going up. And we can't put climate change on pause. We can't put climate impacts on pause. And if Canada doesn't do its fair share when it comes to fighting climate change, how can I go and talk to China or India or other countries in the world and say, hey, let's work together on finding a solution to climate change? Because there's only one way that we solve this, and it's together. Thank you very much.
That's almost like, first of all, do you think Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are going to care about, not only, like, we're not USA, we're just like Canada. On a relative scale, we're not a superpower in the world. That's number one. And the other thing is, we don't have that same approach toward NATO spending. We're still below the 2% target, which is incredible given the fact that we benefit so much from the military strength of USA that just, like, deters a whole bunch of potential enemies. Now, here's RFK Jr., who, as I said, has been an environmental lawyer and just like a very, very public environmentalist for a long time. I don't exactly know, but he probably agrees with a lot of the things that Trudeau and Guibeault say about the climate crisis. He just has a much more practical, and he's willing to, like, accept the world for what it is. But here he is. This is, I think, it's a while ago. Like, you can see in his face, he's a much younger person. But here he is sounding pretty extreme on climate change.
What about politicians, people who express skepticism?
They're selling out the public trust. And, you know, I think those guys who are doing the Koch brothers bidding and who are against all the evidence of the rational mind are saying that global warming doesn't exist, that they are contemptible human beings, and that, you know, I wish that there were a law you could punish them under.
So that's very intense. And as I said, like, that's a younger RFK who, as I'll show, like, he's certainly changed his stance on that. And I think it's more realistic. He realizes that both Republicans and Democrats, or whether that's conservatives and liberals in Canada, want a clean environment, but you can't. Canada prioritizes carbon so much. It's incredible. Here he is speaking.
Well, and even on environmental issues, it's so weird to me because the Democrats have become subsumed in this carbon orthodoxy. And you and I have talked about this, that the only issue is carbon. And what that's done is it's forced them to do something that you should never do if you're an environmentalist, which is to commoditize and quantify everything. So everything is measured by its carbon footprint, how many tons of carbon it produces. And, you're basically, you're putting everything in that kind of box of being able to quantify it and explain its value by numerically. And the reason that we protect the environment is just the opposite of that. The reason that we protect the environment is because there's a spiritual connection. There's there's a love that we have. I got into the environment because I wanted, this connection to the fishes and the birds and the wildlife and the whales and the Purple Mountain's majesty. And that, I understood that the way, God talks to human beings through many vectors, through each other, through organized religion, through the great prophets, through the wise people, the great books of those religions, but nowhere with the kind of detail and texture and grace and joy as through creation. And when we destroy nature, we diminish our capacity to sense the divine, to understand who God is and what our own potential is and duties are as human beings. And that...
I hope what you just said, by the way, is chopped up and put all over every social media platform in the world. When we destroy nature, we degrade our own ability to experience the divine.
Yeah. And that it's not about quantifying stuff. That's what the devil does. He quantifies everything, right? And that is, what he wants us doing. Put a number on it. And the reason we're preserving these things is because we love our children. And it's because we get nature enriches us economically and spiritually and culturally and historically. It connects us to those 10,000 generations of human beings that were here before there were laptops. And it connects us to the most important spiritual lesson of every.
So I even think that if you're not particularly religious, you can relate to that message. Like it is being out in nature is a beautiful thing. And I just think like our RFK's general point, it's not all about carbon. It's not all about like this hyperfixation on one thing. Everybody really wants to protect the environment, but that's the one case of it, like the focusing on the carbon. I think the other thing RFK realizes is that it's such a divisive issue. If you're only focusing on carbon, as he says here, some shady tactics and some like nefarious sort of actors can enter the space for their own benefit.
Climate issues and pollution issues are being exploited by, the World Economic Forum and Bill Gates and all of these big, mega billionaires, the same way that COVID was exploited. To use it as an excuse to clamp down, top-down totalitarian controls on society, and then to give us engineering solutions. And if you look closely, as it turns out, the guys who are promoting those engineering solutions are the people who own the IPs, the patents for those solutions. Oh, it's a way, it's being used. They've given climate chaos a bad name, because people now see that it's just another crisis that's being used to strip mine the wealth of the poor and to enrich billionaires.
So again, I really think Canada needs to adopt more of the RFK mentality towards this. I just think people do see this now. A lot of people across Canada who probably most people agree that we need to protect the environment, but they see that it's not just about that. There's some shady stuff happening. This, again, the hyperfixation on the one issue when other issues in your country are being apparently ignored. It looks like they're being ignored. They don't get nearly enough emphasis. If you watch, like I've said in other videos, Canada's question period, the talk about climate change is incredible. Hardly any talk about how we raise productivity, raise GDP growth in Canada. So much is about carbon tax, climate change, blah, blah, blah.
But something's been changing recently, and it's most noticeable this year.
In January, for the first time in 40 years, we had to put in place a waiting list.
Because the number of people coming for help has skyrocketed, explains Tasha Lackman, who runs the place.
When I started here just under 3 years ago, we were doing 700 families a month, and now we're doing 1,750.
She says they're having to turn people away. But something's been changing recently, and it's most noticeable this year.
So yeah, like the food banks in Canada are basically at their capacity. It's just, again, like if you want to work in climate change, I think you should do that in the private sector. I don't understand why all this tax money has to be funded towards this thing constantly. Like maybe a little bit, but Canada's gone totally overboard. Watch Steven Guibeault. This is, again, very recent. Just how, even with all of our problems in Canada, which I've highlighted in other videos, and it's just, a lot of this is common knowledge at this point, incredibly ridiculous housing crisis, stagnant wages, etc. We're still so focused on this.
What can we expect to come out of this meeting, and what is Canada's pledge?
So Canada's played a very important role in terms of working with nations like the European Union, Japan, the United States for the last many years in helping to mobilize more than $100 billion to help developing countries adapt to climate change and face the impacts of climate change, and also do the transition that many of us are doing. Now,
and again, like, do you think all that money is being spent in the most ethical and proper way possible?
The discussion this year is what will be the new international goal in terms of how much money we need to mobilize to continue supporting developing countries. And some people who are watching might say, well, why should we be doing that? There's a number of reasons why we should be doing that. First and foremost, the more we help them, the less some of those people will want to come to our countries because of climate impacts and because it's becoming more and more difficult to live in their countries.
I thought we were welcoming. What about this 180 from the current government on just like immigration? I thought we were welcoming. What is that? I don't think 3 years ago he would have said that. It's so people don't want to come to our country? What is that as an answer to help other people with climate change, other countries with climate change? It also just like doesn't really make any sense. What world do you think there's just people like that are being constantly displaced from climate change? That's just in a maybe it's happening in very specific cases, but in a general sense, that is not happening, and that's just fear-mongering.
Second, often those economic opportunities that are developed will be done in partnership between local companies, local communities in these countries, and Canadian companies and Canadian initiatives. So it's a win-win on both sides. So there are a number.
Again, I don't know how that's a win-win. Those companies from our country, Canada, and other countries can work with each other anyway. They don't need whatever this is in order to have like some kind of agreement. They can just work with each other. Companies don't need the approval from you, whatever this is, this fund you're setting up. They don't need that to work with each other.
There are reasons why it's important for us to be collectively contributing to support people in the South to adapt and better prepared to face climate change.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that just sounds like such a grift. Like I said, if in a massive way, people are not being displaced because of climate change. And you'd have to like really convince people that things need to go like that Inconvenient Truth movie from Al Gore predicted this incredible change to happen. I remember watching that when I was like 7 in school. That stuff didn't happen. And if it did, not nearly to the magnitude that movie was predicting. I don't know how like you can say there that all these people are being displaced because of climate change. It's incredible. But so as I said, I think Canada needs to get a more practical, more realistic approach to this issue. And just like RFK, just adapt. Realize that some of the things that happen around it are shady and people are coming with their own self-interest, trying to like boost their own companies and stuff like that. And also just the hyperfixation on carbon. Canada has Canada, which most people know has such massive priorities. They're related to like affordability, slow economic growth, just housing obviously is the massive one. But other than that, yeah, lots of problems. But anyway, I'll finish the video here. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and have a great day.